Hello friends, welcome back to the next session on operations planning, scheduling and control. Now let's begin with our learning. In this particular session, we'll be able to understand and deal with the concept of work order generation. The learning objectives. From this particular session, the learners will be able to understand what do we mean by work order generation, what is the importance of work order generation in the current scenario, and what are the various activities that have been undertaken with respect to the work order generation. Now let's understand what do we mean by work order generation. The work order generation is a series and appropriate timely processing of activities that has been undertaken for the proper management of work in the organization. That is, when we say that a production activity, a manufacturing activity, or a supply activity is needed to be undertaken, for each and every single level of activity, a certain processes are needed to be followed. And when those series of activities are needed to be followed, those activities are needed to be completed within a specified time period. So, for those completion of those activities, the appropriate and time allocation is essentially required. And when all those activities are being conducted in the in an equal way, then such activities are being called as a part of an work order generation. This particular activity may be appearing a simpler or straightforward to an individual, but accordingly, the certain complications may arise if there is certain confusion or non-clarity of information between the people who are the resultant or the recipients of the information. And hence, the work order generation is a very critical activity in which each and every activity which has been related to a certain hours, to a certain minute, or a certain hand-in-hand procedure needs to be identified, and then only accordingly the activity needs to be completed. The operations and automated work orders are streamlined from start to finish, and hence in today's scenario we have the computerized maintenance management software which is into existence. The computerized maintenance management softwares gives you a certain information or a detailed chart with respect to which activity is to be undertaken at what level, for the what time of duration, and for how much point of duration. So hence, with this particular concern, the work order duration gives us a clear understanding or a picture about how activities can be completed within a specified time period. And hence, the operation of automated activities is essentially required, and one can easily understand about what flow or series of activities can be undertaken with the help of work order generation reports that have been prepared. The enterprise asset maintenance, that is how an asset needs to be maintained, how are the various activities that needed to be employed, and the planning of activities are needed to be taken into consideration. So the work order generation gives you a clear understanding of the series of activities. And based on the availability of computerization techniques, one can easily prepare the work order generation in a very effective way. Now let's understand what are the various tasks undertaken under the work order generation. For number one, taking care of the work request. Essentially, the work order generation has to see or take into account what are the various requests that have been raised by the various departments. Different types of departments in a frequent or on a daily basis may be raising certain amount of request. So based on the request or the job order that is being raised, the work order request is needed to be prepared, and accordingly the task needs to be allocated to the different people or to the suppliers or to the employees. Crafting the resource assignment and availability. So based on the availability of a work order or the request that has been generated, we have to identify the resources, and then based on the resources that has been identified, assignment and availability of resources needs to be undertaken. So the person who is available, or the employee or the labor who is available, or the machine which is available for conducting a certain job needs to be allocated, and accordingly the assignment of task needs to be undertaken. Availability of an assignments of a certain parts. So based on the availability that has been checked or it has been identified, we need to assign a certain amount or a certain task or a request to that particular job or to a particular machine. And hence the task undertaken under work order request is just allocating the job for a certain product. Warranty management. The concept of warranty management takes into account that whatever job or task that is being assigned, it gets completed within the specified time period. So upkeep, maintenance of the machine, providing of the task on the various frequent time periods, and observations of the completion of tasks after a certain point period also needs to be taken into account by the work order generation. Keeping track of the downtime. So Keeping track of the downtime is essentially important, which takes into consideration about what activities or series of activities are being undertaken. If an activity gets interrupted, then what is the reason for its interruption and how those particular activities can be conducted in a well coordinated and serious way. So for those particular concern, tracking of downtime is essentially required. Last step or the task undertaken in work order generation is scheduling the activity. So once when the activity is being scheduled for a certain concern, one has to see that all those activities are being conducted in the specified schedule and how the schedule is being followed for a certain series of activities. The various concepts with respect to time that is being utilized, the number of hours that have been used, the material that has been consumed, the completion of the work and the task, the targeted achievement, all those processes are needed to be identified, and then the success rate of a particular task needs to be ascertained. Depending on single task or depending on single activity, the ratio may differ for the completion. The another task that has been undertaken with respect to the work order generation is work order creation, in which the labor, the parts, the miscellaneous cost, the condition, tracking, documentation, all those factors are needed to be taken into account. They are needed to be considered, and then the success rate of a particular task needs to be identified. So once the order or the work order is been created, we have to follow and we have to see that all the components or the participants of the work order generation are being employed. They have been functioning very effectively and conducting the activities as per their need and requirement. The work order closure. Now, when it comes a certain picture about completion of a certain task, the work order should be closed accordingly. The work order closure focuses on the concept of including the labor, parts, miscellaneous cost, condition, tracking, documentation, and so on. So once a work order is been created, it needs to be completed in a very effective way. And for the completion of effective work order, we need to see that all the tasks that has been assigned, whether they have been completed in a very effective way and whether the task or the objective of, or the goal of the task is been achieved or not. The next perspective is with respect to the inventory control. The control on inventory is essentially required so as to see that whatever task that was being assigned, whether it was being fulfilled or not, and what amount of inventory was being consumed for the completion of task. Maybe it related to manufacturing, maybe it related to the labor, maybe it related to the cost, that is finances, and so on. So utilization of inventory is essentially important, and increase or decrease in the inventory level with respect to the completion of the task is needed to be identified. The data mining on the large scale. So here in this case, the availability or requirement of data may be required at a very large scale, and hence the data mining process activity is of a important nature. Here, in this case, the data mining activity takes into account about what amount of data is being extracted, what amount of data is being used, and how those particular data can be utilized for the completion of a specified task. Now let's understand the overview of work order management. The work order management is always divided into various small units or small subsets. A certain series of activities needs to be designed, it needs to be planned, and accordingly, the work order for each and every single task or a particular job needs to be created. And for those particular concern, the work order management system is needed to be there into existence. The work order management system may be either a computerized system or a manual system that can be maintained in a particular organization. So depending on the availability, depending on the cost factor, on what tailored system we need to implement, the sort or the business of activities can be undertaken in the organization. Now let's take an example at this particular stage. For example, there are any legal problems that are needed to be addressed. And for those particular concern, certain documentation are needed to be required. And hence, at this particular stage, the contact or communication with the audit department, communication with the finance department, communication with the external strategic level department, and so on needs to be undertaken. And accordingly, various dashboards or certain tabs needs to be created. And when each and every tag or a dashboard gets updated, then accordingly the information that is required can be completed in a specified time period, and the task as to solving of a legal problem can be accomplished. And hence we have to see that all those activities are being distributed in an equal way and everyone is assigned a task for completion of a certain future stage. Now, all of these particular activities may be built in a certain system, and accordingly, implementation of those particular activities or completion of those particular activities may need or take a certain amount of time period. So, for those particular concern, the proper time allocation for the activities is needed to be employed, and accordingly, one has to monitor and see that all those activities gets completed within the specified time period. Now let's understand what is the work order prioritization. With respect to the work order prioritization, the production activity is treated as the prime important activity, which is always a first step in the organization. And hence, any activity which is related to the production department should be done on a priority basis or on the first level basis, and accordingly, the work order priority should be given for the such task. So in order to understand this particular concern, now maybe be this activity related to the maintenance, may it be related to the upkeep of the equipment, may be related to the buildings, equipments, ground levels, vehicles, good working conditions or providing of the facilities or amenities to the employees or the certain laborers. All those activities are of primary importance or a secondary importance. But in those particular concern, one has to understand that manufacturing is a primary activity, and hence for those particular concern the work order generation needs to be prioritized in a very effective way, and accordingly the activities needs to be undertaken in a better position. Those work orders might be of anything from a request or from a light modification. There are certain work orders which is required to be conducted for an effective conclusion of the activities or for just small series of activities. So depending on what type of activity it is, for what duration this particular activity needs to be conducted, the work order prioritization needs to be undertaken, and accordingly the task needs to be completed. Now let's understand what are the merits of work order management using the various softwares. The first objective or the advantage of the work order maintenance software is it ensures a plan and plan maintenance job. So a proper planning of maintenance activities can be undertaken in the organization, and accordingly we can have a preventive maintenance for completion of those particular activities in a very effective way, reducing the downtime and repair cost. So accordingly, the downtime of a particular machine, that is a failure of a particular job, and repairing of cost to the organization can be saved over a period of time, and accordingly the work order activity can be completed as and when it is been required. Keeping the track of inventory. Yes, keeping the track of inventory is sufficiently and equally possible only when there is a proper effective implementation of work order maintenance. With respect to the maintenance software which is there, we can have a proper understanding about what task is being undertaken, whether it has been completed, what is the stage of that particular task, and what percentage of task is been completed. And hence, tracking of inventories and tracking of goods and services is essentially important and is possible. Get rid of the paperwork, and hence when we have a software or a system into existence, then all the paper activities are being reduced and we can move towards a easy stage. It increases the productivity of the organization. Hence, with the help of work order maintenance software which is into existence, the productivity can be boosted in the simultaneous level. And lastly, we can ensure that the best practices in the organization can be implemented, and a proper control of the top level management as well as the strategic decision can be undertaken in a very effective way. Now, how do we manage the work orders? The work orders in the organization can be managed based on the prioritization of the work that has been undertaken. So, what is the priority of a work that needs to be identified, and accordingly, based on those particular concerns, the work order management needs to be undertaken. The priority adds to manufacturing activity, financial activity, strategic activity, employee activity, and so on. So, it enables a particular employer, a particular person, or a manager to identify which task is more comprehensive, which task is prioritized, and accordingly, allocation of resources for completion of those particular activity can be undertaken in a very effective way with the help of work order generation that is into existence. Also, simultaneously, the information which is either of a crucial nature or non-crucial, which is either critical or non-critical, can also be analyzed very effectively, and then the decision as to completion of a certain task can be undertaken. The scheduling of activities for the completion of a certain task can be also well better undertaken with the help of work order managers or work order generation that is into existence. So, in summary, we can understand that the work order management or work order generation is a successful piece of activity which brings or which tries to brings out the successful rate of completion of tasks in the organization. With the help of the various usage of software which is into existence, that is work order management software, one can easily identify which task needs to be completed, what will be the time that will be required, and accordingly how task has to be completed. The various downtime or the errors that have been there in the organization can be easily identified, and accordingly the work order management system software can help the organization to complete those activities in a very effective way. It always tries to save the time of the organization by providing a certain charts or a certain scorecards with respect to how the series of activities can be conducted, the track of each and every activity can be undertaken, and how the job can be allocated to each and every individual person. And lastly, the alternative is to repair when it breaks. So whenever there is a certain amount of repair that is been required for a certain job, the work order maintenance management software can easily make you to understand at what level the repair has been required and how the activity or task important is. And based on those particular concern, initial measures for repairing of those particular activities can be undertaken before the system breaks down. Now let's summarize what we have learned in this particular session. In this particular session, we have understood what do we mean by work order generation, how work order generation task is being undertaken, and what are the various activities or components that are the part of the work order generation. I hope you must have enjoyed the learning at this particular session. Thank you for your patience listening. Thank you.